So welcome everybody. It's great to see people in person in the terrace room for our first Friday. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Paul Teske. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Affairs here at CU Denver, and we're really delighted to do this. It seems a little strange after 2 years. Our last in-person event here in the terrace room was March 6th, 2020. And even then, the COVID was beginning to advance, and we were kind of fist bumping and elbow bumping and not quite sure, what to be doing, but that was on nonprofit arts. And since then, we've had these events on Zoom, and that's gone surprisingly well from my perspective. And today, I believe we have dozens of people online also watching. So hopefully this experiment of mixed in person and on Zoom will work. So again, thank you all for being here. The topic is affordable, family-friendly housing. And we know in Denver, with prices going up, especially the last few years, that's become a bigger challenge at many levels of income and many types of families. Lots of new developments also happening, or maybe put a little bit on hold by COVID, but hopefully happening soon. And so what kind of mix of people are they going to serve? What kinds of needs do we have? We have a great panel of experts here from DPS, from the city, from our own architecture and planning program, and we'll be jumping into the conversation. I will say we will be going back hopefully in person with these events next year. We'll probably get a lot of the regulars in the room. We'd like to get your feedback on breakfast versus lunch. There's sort of pros and cons to early morning versus lunchtime in terms of getting away from work and just timing, but we'll ask for your feedback on that. And next year is actually CU Denver and the School of Public Affairs 50th anniversary as an institution. And so we'll be celebrating in a lot of ways with that, but also we think we'll focus our first Fridays on, 50 years of transportation, 50 years of housing, 50 years of education, what's changed, what's the future hold, and try to take that focus to kind of build that in. So we're excited about that and hope you'll join us for those. I do want to highlight two amazing women who had the idea for this panel and helped put it together, both in the front row, Cindy Kahn and Jane Hansberry, if you would stand up and be appreciated. And they found the folks on this panel as well as our moderator, which is my next job, is to introduce Rodney Milton Jr. Rodney is the current executive director of the Urban Land Institute in Colorado. He's a Colorado native. He has degrees from Florida State University, including a master's in planning. He previously worked as director of Aurora Community Development, and prior to that, held several positions in Atlanta in planning and development. So with that, please welcome our moderator, Rodney Milton.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So glad to see you all in person. I have folks who I met on Zoom that are much taller than I anticipated. Very well dressed, so it's been fantastic. Just a minor correction, I was the manager in Aurora. I appreciate the promotion, but I appreciate that. So as just mentioned, I'm Rodney Milton. I'm the executive director of the Urban Land Institute. The way I like to describe the Land Institute is essentially how I would describe this job that I do to my mom, right? Because before she'd say, my son works for the mayor, she'd be really, really excited. This job, I had really no idea how to describe it to her. And so I came up with this. ULI is an organization whose members shape cities and create places. And because that work is so impactful, we got to make sure that we convene. We're collaborative, that we understand what's happening, that we derive best practices on the ways that cities grow and grow equitably and sustainably. And so in short, I save the world. No, I'm sure that's what she's gonna say anyway. But thank you again for coming. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Cindy. This is an excellent opportunity to discuss a topic for which is very prescient, very personal for all of us. Whether you're thinking about buying a house, which I had to do last year as I relocated from Atlanta. It was excruciating. No one told me how bad it was going to be, which means you guys have to solve this problem today. But I think we have an extraordinary panel of individuals who have insights into what this problem looks like from a multitude of perspectives. First, we've got Jessica Dominguez. She's a DPS teacher. We connected on that because I'm a former teacher, once a teacher, always a teacher. And she's just fantastic. She's going to give us perspective. She is leading the Denver Classroom Teachers Association's task force on housing, and she'll give us some insights from that perspective. We've got Jennifer Balcom, who's development director of HOST. That's the City and County of Denver's perspective on what they're doing around housing policy. We've got Dr. Carrie I tried my best. She gave me so much grace. She's like, if you mess it up, it doesn't matter. No one gets it right. So we're just gonna call her Dr. M. And she's gonna give us a perspective in terms of the research she's doing around mapping housing, right? And the housing needs associated with the region. And then we'll round it off. We've got Senator Julie Gonzalez from District 34. She's gonna be joining us via Zoom and give us insights. She led or was part of the housing task force, the Transformational Housing Task Force that was designed to understand how to spend the federal dollars that were coming from the stimulus. And so we'll get insights from there. And then we'll round it off with Dr. Jenny Steffel Johnson, who I do know how to pronounce your name. And she'll give us some insights into the design elements incorporated in affordable housing. And then we will open it up for questions and I'll moderate the Q&A. And so get your questions ready. Make sure that there are questions with a question mark at the end. So Jessica, turn it over to you.
For having me. I've been a classroom teacher for 20 years. In 2019, I was teaching a science lesson and I had first graders. And two of the first graders, I worked in North Denver at the time, Columbian Elementary. It was a small school. And we were getting smaller because of the gentrification that was happening and families couldn't afford to live over there anymore. And so I knew of at least two kids in my classroom that were suffering through housing insecurities. They were experiencing homelessness. One little girl was living out of her car with her family. And I was starting the science lesson. Kids are so excited about it. And she's in the back, kind of on her knees. And the title of the book was Every Living Thing Has a Home. And it crushed me. It really did. And that's what started my, I guess, housing advocacy journey. I took a sabbatical for about 1.5 years to advocate and learn. Went through the READY program. That's a development program. I was just researching. I was asking everyone, what can you do about affordable housing? Something has to be done. And I began to realize that I'm sure maybe some of you know about the inverted L, and that's areas that are vulnerable to gentrification or displacement, I'm sorry. And that inverted L also has some other inequities, right? Concerning education. We see kids in that area, lower test scores, lower graduation rates. So we know the connection between housing and education. I think something that's not really mapped out, and I don't know how we would do that, but is the trauma that we're seeing because of it. Everyone knows that the heart of the classroom is the bond between a teacher and a student, right? And that takes a couple months probably to build. Not that learning is not taking place, but until that's really solidified, that learning, is slower. And even the younger kids will call me mom once in a while. And that's, I think, is the saddest part, is that's the housing insecurity is disrupting their social fabric of life. And it's that the way that's fleshed out is we see emotional deregulation, inability to concentrate, inability to use and process language. And that's what's affecting, right, their education. And we could say, well, it's 6 months or they're behind 1 year. And we really don't know. But it's severe when we say things like children are resilient. And while that is true, resiliency is learned through a safety bond, right? And going through negative experiences with support. And their support is being taken away. And so that's where my advocacy has kind of been birthed from. And yeah, that's why I'm helping to lead the DCTA Housing Task Force. And we're going to be going to CEA, which is the state union, and asking just for them to support our new business item that is about advocating for housing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, my second J, Jennifer, you're up next.
So let's talk about, okay, thank you. So let's talk about, for affordable family housing in Denver, let's start with what is family and what is affordable. So just to put this in general perspective, a family can be a lot of things, right? It can be a grandparent with grandchildren. It can be a couple with biological children. It could be a single foster parent. It could be two siblings living together. So for the purposes of this, we're just going to say 3-bedroom units or more is how we're going to think about this right now as family housing. And the other question is, what is affordable? So affordable means that you aren't paying more than 30% of your income toward housing and utilities. And it means that you don't make more than 80% of the area median income for Denver, which right now is about $80,000 for a family of 4 as of 2021. The Department of Housing Stability has a 5-year strategic plan that went into place in January of this year. We commissioned Root Policy Research to do all the data that went into that strategic plan. And their report says families with children in the home grew at a slower rate than households overall. My hypothesis is that it's because we're not building units that families can live in Denver. And that's why it's growing at a slower rate. So we see that here. In 1-person and 2-person households at the top of the chart, we can see that the increase from 2010 to 2019 is much larger than the increase in 3, 4, and 5-person families down below. So this shows from 2010 to 2019, the percentage of owners and renters in Denver and everything together. Now, what we see all together, so green and blue are studios, 1-bedrooms, and 2-bedrooms. And what we see is that percentage hasn't really changed. So the overall number has gone up, but the percentage hasn't changed much during that time period. However, it gets really interesting when we look at the breakdown between owners and renters. So if you look at renters, again, the blue and green are studios, 1s and 2s. 83% have less than 3 bedrooms. So in the rental market, we're building small units. The homeownership story is very different. So for homeownership, only 35% of units have less than 3 bedrooms. 65% have 3 bedrooms or more. So let's look at who's actually buying those units that are big enough for families. Well, not surprisingly, most of them are going to people at 150% AMI and more. There's some people at 120% AMI, a few at 100, and a few at 80%. But once we get down into the affordable range from 0 to 80% AMI, we see that there are no people buying houses and condos, and those are the ones that have enough room for families. And if we look at what's happening in the rental market on the far right is 100% AMI, we're building more units than are needed. At 80% AMI, we still have more units than are needed. Once we get below 80 and all the way down to 30, you can see that there's a shortage. So we've got housing units being priced for owners at the upper end of the range, and we're short on rental units that are priced in the affordable range, and the ones that are affordable, 83% of them are too small for families. So the question is, where are people going? Well, they're renting predictably wherever the rents are lowest. And so we see here, West Central, Southwest, Southeast, and the far Southeast have the lowest rents and also the lowest vacancy rates. So HOST's strategic plan for 5 years includes a top line goal of building 7,000 units that are affordable over the next 5 years. And my team thus far this year is on track to beat the number. We've got 7% targeted at 3 bedrooms or more, and we're having negotiations with every developer that comes in to try to get them to produce at least 7% of units that are 3 bedrooms. Our sources for this year are large compared to usual because of we're issuing GO bonds this year, that's not frequent. That's not an annual source. So we've got 30 million coming in from GO bonds. We also have 28 million from the American Rescue Plan Act that's from the federal government. That's just this year. That's a one-time infusion. And a little bit lower on this list, you'll see that we've got home funds also from the American Rescue Plan Act. Those together are 39 million plus 30 from GO bonds that are not a recurring source. So next year, we're going to go back to about 35 million in funds that we have to put out for all of this. And with that, I'll pass it to Carrie, who's going to talk about what's happening on the regional level.
So as Jennifer just said, I'm going to follow up on the Denver problem to argue that it's also part of a regional problem. And Denver can't be, or nor should it expect it to be, to solve this problem alone. Although there's currently 1,400 students who are homeless in the Denver public school system, since at least 2016, we've had 12 to 14,000 students in our region every year who are homeless. And the numbers in Denver are systematic, as I said at the beginning, of a broken regional housing system. And housing markets are regional because job markets are regional. And we plan a lot of things that are regional systems, like transportation and jobs. We do population forecasts, and all of that data should help us to plan where we need different types and amounts of housing. We do zone at the local level, but not for specific numbers of units. We just hope they come. And zoning is also often very exclusionary. And so as a result, the graphs on the right show that between 2014 and 2019, home values and rents region-wide have greatly risen above the median family incomes. We now have 352,000 at the regional level who are cost burdened, and a large share of those hundreds of thousands of people are severely cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than 50% of their income on rents or their mortgage. So to talk a little bit more about jobs and why we have these people so many people who are cost burdened, 402,785 private sector jobs as of August 2021 pay less than $43,000 a year. That's 50% of the area median income. 45% of workers commute to another county for a job. And so that also adds on to their transportation costs and their household budget. So if they lose a job because of their car breaking down and they can't afford the transportation anymore, then that puts them at risk of losing their home. And if they lose their home, where do they go when our vacancies are so low and there's little affordability anywhere in the region? So as an example of how much of the job planning that we do at a detailed level, this is a chart from the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation, who does these industry cluster profiles, and they detail all the salaries and occupations in these industries that are really big in our region and are growing. In this cluster, of the top 10 occupations for the financial services industry, 68,000 workers, or 41% of the jobs, are paid than less than 70% of the AMI. So in Denver, those workers in the financial services industry would qualify for affordable housing. Unfortunately, when we talk about and promote industry and job growth, we often don't talk enough about the housing that we need for those jobs. And so we get the mismatch we have in Denver, we have the mismatch in the region as well, but it's slightly different looking. So the household sizes are in the red columns in the middle, and then the bedrooms that would typically match those household sizes are to the left and the right of those two household groups. So you can see that we have a lot greater share of 1 and 2 person households throughout the region compared to the number of 0, 1, and 2 bedrooms in the region. And if you look at the 3 to 7 person households in the region, a much smaller share than the number of 3, 4, and 5 bedroom homes we have in the region. And so that's a quintessential picture of that missing middle you've been probably hearing a lot about in the news. I even heard Trevor Noah do if you don't know, now you know segment on missing middle the other night. So this is missing middle housing. This is from one of our former students, Matthew Siegel, who did his capstone for the city of Centennial on affordable housing. So why do we have such a mismatch in our housing? Is we allow developers are chasing this too small shares of the market. The high income families who can buy a single family home, and higher income renters who will live or buy a condo in a higher density, high rise building. And we've done a good job of zoning for those high density buildings along our light rail transit lines throughout the region. But in many places throughout the region, this missing middle housing is not allowed to be built anywhere. HOA covenants have restrictions against it, and so do many zoning codes throughout the region. So in the last 15 years, only 2% of the housing that was constructed were 2 to 4 person households or housing units, which would be great for family households, townhomes with 3 bedrooms. And overall, all of our housing in the region, only 4.6% is that middle type of housing. So the other problem, as you also probably have heard a lot in the news, is we're just not producing enough. So the 2 maps on the left and in the one on the left and in the middle show how much housing we produced in the last decades prior to the Great Recession. We were building, housing was keeping up largely with demand, and that's why you see so much red, which represents increase. And then this last decade, we have had a lot of loss in our housing units as small apartment buildings get replaced with fewer units and other reasons, and very little large increases in most of the region, except for the places in Denver where you see a lot of housing construction. So I'll end on a little bit of a brighter note. So what can we do? First, we have to work and plan regionally. This can't be something that Denver shoulders alone. And in doing that, what does planning mean? We need to provide a lot more data, technical assistance, and guidelines to developers, because they will all develop to the market, the high-end market that they want to capture, not the entire market that needs housing. We also have to work to build that acceptance among communities to accept different types of housing, work with employers, to coordinate jobs, housing, and funding, continue to find a lot of sources for affordable housing like the City of Denver has done, and we have to be creative. And that's why I have those pictures also from Matthew Siegel's work for Centennial. Those shopping malls are occupying a lot of land that could be great affordable family housing.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Senator Gonzalez.
Well, excellent. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm grateful that y'all were able to allow me to participate via Zoom. I just got off the floor right as the panel was beginning, and so I'm glad to be able to join you all here from the Capitol. I agree. We've been talking about local need for housing, the importance of regional coordination. And I also would argue that there is increasingly a need for the state to get involved in housing issues. Just as a bit of context, I live in an affordable housing unit myself. I have seen how access to stable housing transformed my life personally and allowed me to continue to live in the community that I love in Northwest Denver. I live 2 blocks north of the Broncos Stadium. But as for a long time, I think the state of Colorado very much thought of housing as a local issue. And it's only been in the past few years that we set up a historic investment in affordable housing, and prior to the pandemic, and then given this once in a generation investment to help us recover from the pandemic through the American Rescue Plan Act, we were pretty intentional and looking at both the impact of COVID and the way that families who were living in multi-generational families living under one roof or what have you, lower income folks who were at risk of or actively experiencing homelessness, we recognize that part of our recovery is actually putting a significant investment into housing. And so out of our allocation as a state of American Rescue Plan Act dollars, we made a pretty intentional decision last year to set aside a large chunk of money to address the housing crisis as a state. And, for me, as someone who represents Northwest and downtown Denver in the Colorado State Senate, housing has long been an issue for us. What I found to be fascinating as we embarked upon this affordable housing transformational task force, we met as Democrats, Republicans, urban, rural legislators, the departments who work on housing issues, and also bringing to the table experts from across the state who work on the entire spectrum of housing issues. We realize that it's not just Denver, it's not just the urban sort of metro area that is experiencing housing crisis. Rural communities are also experiencing housing crisis, and particularly some really fascinating and quite honestly scary housing crisis that we're seeing in the mountain resort towns as well. And so if you look statewide, currently the shortage in Colorado, we have about a shortage of nearly 121,000 affordable rental units. And when you look at rental housing, nearly half of all Coloradans are considered cost burdened, and an additional 24% out of that number being severely cost burdened. And just when you're looking at the spectrum, right, of like who is experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, who is renting, and who is able to purchase a home, we're seeing, because of that scarcity of housing, just incredible price increases, right? Just in the past decade, the average home price in the state increased 130% from 2011 to 2021. But then statewide, the median price increase additional 7% just from January to February 2022. And the median home price is now $555,000, which is a 90% increase from March 2021. And so when we look at just that data and the ways in which this is playing out in resort communities in a very different way than it does play out for us here in the Denver metro area, we recognize that we really do have to walk and chew gum at the same time as a state. And so we, as I mentioned, we engaged in this whole task force process to convene all of these subject matter experts, legislators in a bipartisan manner, and in January released a task force report. And now those report recommendations are being translated into policies. And so we are allocating $400 million to tackle in very direct and intentional ways our affordable housing crisis by establishing a revolving loan fund, by creating new grants that are available to local governments and to nonprofit organizations. We are working to preserve and protect what we call, naturally occurring affordable housing with things like land banking, supporting mobile home parks, and encouraging those mobile home parks to be bought by the residents who own them as well. And then, also for making some really strategic investments to support folks who are at risk of or actively experiencing homelessness, particularly when we're talking about folks who are leaving congregate settings, whether that is jail or prisons, whether we're talking about folks who are leaving hospitals or who have received mental health care. And I really am proud of the work that we as a state are beginning to play, recognizing that this is no longer just a local issue, that we do have to address this as a state. And so a lot of these bills that we are moving through the process currently are trying to be thoughtful about how we engage in this process. And so just one of the last things that I'll end on is, some of the recognition, traditionally we would think of 30% area median income as being the barometer. But given some of the really extraordinary dynamics that are coming to play in some of the mountain resort towns, we're actually starting to build out different layers of area median income determinations, just recognizing we heard over the summer, a small business hiring $25 an hour for an entry-level baker. They couldn't find a worker to do that work because of the lack of housing. They then went up to $40 an hour, and we're still having trouble finding workers who were able to both do that work for that amount of money and then also find housing to live. And so in some of the policies that we're working through now, just being intentional and for some of the area median income that we're thinking about for those mountain resort towns going up to 140%, while for our urban area, really intentionally wanting to build only and make these grants available for 80% area median income and below, recognizing that that's where the need really is. And so being able to differentiate given the different dynamics that are playing out across the state, really, really excited about that work.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're going to follow up and close it out with our fourth J. Jennifer, and you can take it away from here.
There we go.
Slides are coming up.
So I'm so excited to hear about the energy and the funding that's available to start solving some of these problems. It's pretty exciting to hear. In my remarks, which will be quite quick, I'm going to kind of step back from the numbers a little bit and take a look at what should we do with this funding and this energy. So step one, as we have heard, is we need to hang on to what we've got. To thrive, families need stability. And so ensuring that our existing supply of affordable housing remains so is essential for housing, for families, and for our housing stock. So quickly, a few things along the preserving line. Preserving our market affordable units, meaning naturally occurring affordable housing that is not subsidized. Often making small investments in repairs, energy efficiency, accessibility for these units, relatively small amount of money, but enables them to stay viable and affordable for the households that already live there. Making existing units permanently affordable. There's some really creative programs out there. I don't have time to give details right now, but I've got it available if anyone wants to ask. San Francisco's small site program, for example, allows nonprofits and small businesses to purchase small apartment buildings and keep them permanently affordable. DC has a program called GAIN that stands for Generating Affordability in Neighborhoods that actually incentivizes landlords to set aside some of their units to stay permanently affordable. As we've heard, mobile homes matter. Enabling those, this was news to me of a couple years ago, I'll be honest, that mobile homes or manufactured homes are actually the largest supply of naturally occurring affordable housing in the United States. We don't see them a lot because they're intentionally pushed to the margins, but they really matter for a lot of households. So enabling the often vulnerable folks that live in those to maintain control over their homes is really important. And again, there's some really creative work being done to achieve that. Finally, preserving existing subsidized units is increasingly a challenging problem. Programs like low-income housing tax credits, project-based Section 8, those are a finite amount of time that units stay affordable. And because of when those programs started, we're seeing the contracts expiring at an increasing rate. So these numbers that's showing in the next, between 2020 and 2030, Denver is going to lose 7,700 units of this housing, potentially. There's ways to incentivize the landlords to stay in the programs, but because we have such a hot housing market, a lot of times landlords are saying, okay, I'm going to switch to market rate and make more money. So that is a spot where we need to creatively incentivize those units to remain in the affordable housing inventory. So obviously preserving what we have isn't enough. We also need to build new. There are not enough affordable units. One thing I will simply mention is that for all families to thrive, those units need to be located in really great, diverse neighborhoods. Everybody, no matter how much money you make, has to be able to access grocery stores and schools and recreation opportunities and transportation options. So we can't just focus on the inverted L. We can't just focus on certain neighborhoods. We need to have good quality, diverse, affordable housing throughout our cities and our region. So, as Carrie mentioned, missing middle housing is a really important and missing piece of our solution. In part, one of the reasons it's so important is because it's really attractive. It can fit nicely into our existing neighborhoods and not face a lot of NIMBY pushback. So again, there's great examples of this being done and done well. And I know in conversations in Denver, there's certainly interest in reviving this sort of forgotten form of housing. Another asset we have that we need to leverage is older buildings that were initially designed for a different purpose. This is an example in Belgium. In Belgium, Savonnerie Hémont, that was a soap factory that was renovated to become 42 units of affordable subsidized housing ranging from 1 to 6 bedrooms with beautiful shared outdoor space. Carrie showed an example of a shopping mall. There are office renovations. Particularly with our recent economic changes, there's a lot of these spaces that are currently unused and could be transformed into housing with some creative design work and some creative funding. Single-family homes. They've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and less expensive, less affordable over time, as we all know. In 1980, the median size was 1,595 square feet. In 2015, the median size was 2,500 square feet. So it's kind of crazy because they're less affordable, and in so many cases, more space than is actually needed for families. So building these small, efficiently designed units is part of the solution as well. I would also have to make the case that all of the new housing that we've built is done with universal design principles. Intergenerational filtering is part of the system that needs to happen. We need to allow older families that are ready to downsize to move into small units and smaller, families to move into larger units, et cetera. One of the ways we can make sure that process still happens is through design and making sure things are accessible. The top 3 bullet points there, 1 no-step entrance, having wide halls and doors, and a full bath on the main floor are considered the kind of key baseline items because they're the most expensive to change on your own, but relatively affordable to include upfront. A recent Harvard study showed that only 4% of the housing stock in the United States actually has all 5 of those things. We are not really prepared for aging households, so it needs to be part of our new construction thinking. Finally, thinking about creating shared spaces for families. There's so many beautiful examples of more formal co-housing models, less formal cottage courts like this. There's some beautiful examples here in Denver in formerly Stapleton, now Central Park, where you can see small households, often single parent households, elderly households, people coming together to help each other out. So finally, we're talking about housing for people's lives and doing all we can to make sure that the housing is affordable, but also ensures that they have a good quality of life.
So thank you so much for ending us off in that early discussion with the solution set, because there's nothing more depressing than a beautiful chart telling you how far we have to go, right, on a Friday, right? So ending it off with a nice solution set. Just to summarize, we tackled this from hyperlocal, real students, real families facing real problems in the school setting. Then going to the city and county level, recognizing what tools and policies that can be incorporated at the city and county level. Then we've got a regional focus, recognizing this dynamic and nexus between job centers and the regional element of jobs, population growth and attraction, because this is such a beautiful place to be, and housing, and that nexus. And then rounding it off with the solution set. Regional, going to the state and understanding that state level, and then rounding it off with solutions. We are right on our time. You're welcome. No, I'm just kidding. This is you all. We're going to open it up for questions. If you have a question from the audience, go ahead and reach out to the mic. I'll try to take questions from the Zoom, but I want to pose the first question here, which is, we have the problem set. We have these different power centers at each level to understand what levers you could potentially push or pull to make things happen. I have a background on the implementation side. So I'd love to hear, when we can balance this out, what do you think the barriers to implementation are? Because I'll be completely honest with you, I've been in this space for almost 15 years and I've seen all of this. And I want to see, what do you think are the barriers to implementation? Maybe just one or two things. And we can start, let's see, with Jennifer. Barriers to implementation.
I would say hands down, more money.
Okay.
So we've got rising construction costs right now, and we've got a greater need for supportive housing, for housing homeless, and we've got a greater need for housing families. And so we have a lot of internal discussion right now about, do we fund less per unit in order to produce more units, or do we fund more per unit because of the rising construction costs? So I would say in the end, what we need is more money.
Excellent.
I'll just
Jennifer.
add in, I think one barrier is NIMBYism, of people having, I would say, outdated ideas of what affordable housing means and who's it for, and what, all of that, what is implied by affordable housing. It's for everyone.
All right. Carrie.
I'll just jump in on that point, is that, when we look regionally, so much of the land is not zoned for even 2 units, even a duplex can't be built. And so to change that zoning takes community engagement with a lot of people. And then the planners in those communities need technical assistance and help. And the good news is Dr. Cogg's housing working group is really a lot more active than it's been. They actually have a board retreat this weekend on housing at the regional level. I don't know a lot of details. That's all I heard. And I was thrilled. So I think that's a good sign that the region is talking about what can we do in our communities with now the new Inclusionary Zoning Act at the state level and new $400 million at the state level from the Recovery Acts to fund affordable housing. But the zoning has to change and the community has to accept it. And so we have to work on that social piece so that we can do the technical construction piece.
I love it. Let me go to Senator.
Thank you. I want to echo money and absolutely NIMBYism. What we have seen, there's a lot of different ways that you could spend $400 million. You could just probably build probably 400 units and call it good, right? And or you can find other ways to build in the gaps to help those projects that wouldn't get off the ground otherwise to meet that financing, sort of missing mile, if for lack of a better term. But one of the things that we have really heard a lot about over the past few years has also just been the challenges around zoning. And so last year, in addition to moving forward, I believe it was House Bill 21-1117, which gave local municipalities more tools to utilize inclusionary zoning ordinances. We also passed House Bill 21-1271, which created $35 million as a sort of test to see, hey, if local municipalities and jurisdictions start to change their zoning on their own, here is a bucket of money that we will make available for them to actually go forward and build new affordable housing. And we were shocked at the success of that program, at folks, local communities who said, we need housing. We don't have anyone who's done any of these housing plans before. Help, and being able to give them some technical assistance so that they can start thinking more intentionally as well. And then an interesting thing that just politically happened earlier this session, a very conservative Republican actually moved forward a bill that would have held municipalities to account if they enact anti-growth ordinances. And that was a really fascinating development for a couple of reasons related to title and what have you. The bill didn't move forward, but we're still in conversations in a bipartisan way around, look, we are all talking about how do we upzone, right? And ensure that there is encouragement of density. But on the flip side, should there be a consequence when those NIMBY tendencies take over in a local community? And real fascinating sort of left-right conversation. But I do think that this is one of the areas that partisanship has sort of started to melt away because we're all recognizing the depth of the crisis.
That is excellent. And I appreciate your tactic of utilizing your nail color to make sure everybody's always paying attention. I'm definitely going to incorporate that. So really, really quickly, I'm going to let Jessica round us off. I will say, just having gotten from City of Aurora, why the City of Aurora applied for that feasibility for under HB 1271 and got that grant, and then I left them. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I think yes to all of this, and looking that school districts in other states are getting involved.
Yes.
And sometimes school districts are the biggest landowners, and they don't have to be developers, because I get it, it's not their lane, but we all need to be working together. We've seen school bonds that are used to help with housing. And so just thinking creatively, also churches that have extra land have been using their land to utilize. So all of these things can help with the solution.
Love it. All right. Questions? Yep. Come on to me.
Yes, my name is Paco Martinez, and I live in subsidized housing, and I'm an alum of CU Denver. Now, what happens is right now, my question really is, I can't afford affordable housing because first of all, your income has to be twice the amount of the rent. And the rent was $950 for affordable housing for one bedroom, right? And it was in a nice neighborhood. I'm not going to say it wasn't in a nice neighborhood. I was surrounded by Mexican, Spanish-speaking people, and I enjoyed it because I'm bilingual.
All right.
But I couldn't afford it. So this is my whole question. How come, later on, I want to ask the difference between, I know what subsidized housing is and I know what affordable housing is. I do not know what Section 8 housing is. So I want to ask
Capital
you personally.
affordable.
Not because I know that's going to be a different situation. But what my question is how do we encourage people, the construction industry, to build single dwelling houses? Because I tried to look for my son-in-law said he would buy me a house because I was homeless for 5 months while I was a student at CU. My son-in-law said he would buy me a house to find one house in North Denver, because that's where I want to remain. I want to stay in my neighborhood. So there were no houses for sale. How do we encourage the construction industry to build single dwelling houses? And one thing I do disagree with, one thing that I did see, and that's building the houses too close together. I used to live in West Denver, and I'm telling you, literally, you could touch the house next door. That's what caused the fire near Boulder, is all those houses were too close. One house caught on fire, and they all caught on fire. So I'm kind of against that, but I want more single. How do we encourage construction of single dwelling houses. Thank you.
No problem. Does anyone want to take that? I mean, I'm going to refrain. Anyone?
The goal of developers is to maximize the value of land. So land is the limited resource. And so the question you're asking is a really good question. I don't have a good answer, unfortunately. What happens is that if you picture a piece of land, putting a really big house on it maximizes the value. Putting an apartment building with really small units maximizes the value. And so developers are looking to maximize the value of their investment in land. A lot of the folks that we work with, a lot of the developers we work with are nonprofits. And so the growth of the nonprofit industry has really helped the affordable housing industry, where it's not about maximizing all the profits on the land. That makes a really big difference, and that's part of the solution.
Yeah. And I'll quickly say, I think you bring up a very interesting dynamic when you say, I want a single family, like a single occupancy, but I don't want. So what that recognizes is this dynamic between the conflicting values. So to put more density would solve some of the affordable problem, because more on the land is essentially more supply. But that space creates this conflict. So a lot of folks need to face the confrontation between what their values are of wanting affordable housing, inclusive neighborhoods, and all of that, with the outcomes of these choices that they make with the way they live their lives in terms of the housing stock that's available. So one of the solutions is a diversity of housing stock. When Carrie mentioned that missing middle, it's because we tend towards one or two types of housing. Your options are extraordinarily limited. And what you're asking is, how do you get more options in the marketplace so that it's not just a large single family home, a townhouse is too close, or a multifamily, which is essentially all the three options that you have right now. And then one, oh, Carrie, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
No, I am.
I was just gonna say, in Denver, I think our accessory dwelling units program could also help to address those small one-bedroom could be like a single family, one-person home in the backyard of somebody else's home. And, some creative shared costs on the mortgage and the construction of that ADU, which we have with the Elevations Land Trust and West Denver Renaissance Collaborative, and the city has grant money in it. I think if that program can really take off to the scale they're planning, we will see those smaller one or two person units being created on single family lots and better utilizing that land and providing housing for someone like yourself.
Agreed. Any more questions in the audience? Yes, here we go. Take it.
All right. My name's Cindy Barraway. I'm a former elected official in the city of Lakewood. I just want to make a plea.
All right.
So the people who make decisions on zoning, sir, with your planning commission, do you know who's on your planning commission in the city you live in?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have this knowledge? Are they educated? Are they looking in this direction? Many of them probably are not, sadly, right? So if you have this bent and you have this passion for this, get on your planning commission.
Excellent.
And then run for city council on top of that. Because sadly, after I came off council in Lakewood, not just my fault, Lakewood passed the strategic growth initiative, right? Limiting growth to 1%. Huge hit to the city of Lakewood. So that's why it's very important to be invested in who you're electing, find out what their platform is and what do they believe in. Because now in the city of Lakewood, we have a huge issue, our Lakewood Head Start programs, no students because they can't afford to live near the school. They're having to move away. I do have one question. Have you also looked into the construction defect laws in the state of Colorado, which are severely impacting the impacting the developer's ability to build because it costs so much for them to bring in insurance to each unit that they're developing. So it's a huge cost. I don't know if the state's looking at that, state legislature, to maybe relax those rules on construction defect. Thank you.
Excellent question.
I will jump in on that construction defects question and applaud you for encouraging folks to get involved at the local level. Because so much of our affordable housing transformational task force was focused on how do we allocate thoughtfully that $400 million. we didn't actually have a ton of time to get to consensus on a number of policy issues. But one of the things that we recognized is that we should, as a state, continue this conversation around housing policy. And so when we're in the legislature, we have an education committee, we have a transportation committee, we have a state affairs, what have you, right? We have a number of standing committees. And one thing that came up as an idea was being able to have a standing housing committee to where we can continue these conversations with the level of nuance and expertise that it deserves as an issue. One of the conversations that we had was around policy, was around construction defects statutes that have really plagued, I think, our state. And there was a compromise struck in, I want to say 2013 or 14. And, while everyone thought that compromise would address the problem, I think we're all seeing the ramifications and the need for continued policy to address the issues that are confronting us as a state. And I have had a number of conversations, and it would be a politically deeply complicated fight, which is why your earlier point around, if you're passionate about this, get involved, is so important.
Thank you so much. And that was an excellent question. I think end today so that we're on time. Insights, thank you for giving us the opportunity to understand both the problem as it's presented at different levels and the solutions associated with it, and an opportunity for you to get more involved. So again, thank you so much for hosting this. Thank you for inviting ULI. And I encourage all of you to go Google ULI, Urban Land Institute, district councils, We Are Colorado, join ULI so that you can be a part of some of these solutions and conversations. Thank you again so much for hosting us. Thank you.